In a dramatic development in the lead-up to talks with the United States, DPRK leader Kim Jong Un has announced a suspension to nuclear weapons and ballistic missile testing. Additionally, a nuclear test site will be shut down as the DPRK prepares for diplomatic summits with both its southern neighbor and after that with Donald Trump, the American president. To discuss the reasons behind this announcement and the possible consequences to follow, I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Su Ge, chairman of the China Pacific Economic Cooperation Council, Zhao Tong, fellow of the Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy, and Anna Tangen, current affairs commentator. We shall also cross over to speak to Joseph Kim. He's standing by in Seoul. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui.
The DPRK will stop nuclear tests and launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles, effective immediately. This is DPRK state media outlet KCNA quoting Kim in a speech made at the third plenary meeting of the 7th Central Committee of the ruling Workers' Party of Korea.
The DPRK will stop nuclear tests and launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles from April 21, 2018. To guarantee suspension of nuclear tests in a transparent manner, the Republic's northern nuclear test site will be abolished.
Kim said Pyongyang will never use nuclear weapons unless there is a nuclear threat or provocation, and will in no case proliferate nuclear weapons and nuclear technology. Kim also told party members that from now on, all Pyongyang's efforts will be concentrated on building up a strong socialist economy. The surprise announcement comes just before Kim is set to meet South Korean President Moon Jae-in and possibly US President Donald Trump. Next Friday, Kim will go to the demilitarized zone that has divided the peninsula since the Korean War. He will be the first DPRK leader to do so since the fighting ended.
Gentlemen, question number one. Do you think all of the senior leaders in this game concerned have all been outsmarted? Don't you think that the diplomacy of the DPRK has been seriously underestimated?
Well, that's a very good question to start with. Actually, I like a word, a phrase you used just now. You said that dramatic changes have taken place. As researchers of international relations, we are used to the ups and downs of the development, but not this dazzling. Well, the North Koreans would have something to announce that's expected by most researchers, scholars throughout the world. But this piece of news still came as a little bit of a surprise because they announced that they will suspend all nuclear and missile tests, and they will embark upon a road of economic construction that try to raise the living standards of the people. So that remains to be seen what would actually happen afterwards.
But the issue is, Dr. Zhao, technically, do you think suspension of both intercontinental ballistic missiles and nuclear testing would amount to denuclearization?
Well, that's two totally different things. Suspending the ICBM test and nuclear tests is basically an effort in the direction of freezing North Korea's nuclear capabilities, avoiding its capabilities from further enhancing. That's very different from giving up existing capabilities. And I see no North Korean interest in immediately dismantle its existing nuclear weapons and missiles.
Then the immediate concern shared by observers, Chinese and foreign alike, at this defining moment about the future of the Korean Peninsula is whether Mr. Kim Jong Un has got the security assurance before he has made up his mind about this breakthrough in the announcement. Anna?
Trump sent his emissary, Pompeo, and I don't think there was any real progress. If there had been, this is something that Donald Trump would have announced in one of his Twitters. I think at this point I'm going to agree with my colleague that this is not, there's something very different between suspending testing. In many ways, what Kim has said is look, I have the nuclear bomb, I have the delivery systems, I don't have to do that anymore. Now remember, North Korea has had 6 nuclear tests, that's the same as Pakistan and India. All right, and if you start looking at the legislation that followed the announcement that they passed, they indicated that they would not use or share nuclear weapons unless they were provoked or there was some sort of threat. So in that particular case, what they're saying is, look, we have the weapon, you have to deal with that. And when we meet, I'm meeting you as a nuclear power. My shift might be to my economy, but I intend to extract concessions from you based on this kind of nuclear posture.
Thank you. Let me cross over to ROK, where our CGTN correspondent Joseph Kim is standing by. Hello, Kim. We are discussing.
Hello.
We're discussing what is behind the dramatic announcement and development in the Korean Peninsula. Now, do you think automatically the DPRK has become a nuclear-armed member in the small club? Because he got the confidence, it seems, that, okay, we have been armed to the teeth with the nuclear deterrence. Now it's time to sit down and talk about economic reconstruction. What do you think of this assumption?
Well, I think this is exactly what Kim Jong Un has been planning for quite some time. This has been in their constitution that the DPRK is a nuclear armed state. So now before he meets with South Korean President Moon Jae-in or the possible talks with US President Donald Trump, he's now meeting them as a global leader with nuclear weapons, and this makes him so that he's a legitimate leader standing toe to toe with these global leaders. And I think that's one of the reasons that North Korean DPRK leader Kim Jong Un has adamantly said this, and we heard this in the state media report where they announced this suspension, where they essentially said that we've completed this program, we are sufficient in the amount of testing that we've done. Therefore, from now on, we're going to focus and shift our focus to the economy. This is one of the reasons that Kim Jong Un has really now, even in his New Year's speech, said that he would continue to now focus on the economy. So it does seem something that was very planned by the DPRK.
No one is surprised, Anna, that Mr. Kim Jong Un really wants to meet with the US president. However, with no apparent breakthroughs in the process of denuclearization, as we discussed earlier on the panel here in the studio, why did we have this dramatic decision from the White House, namely President Trump, to meet with Kim Jong Un? Is it a matter of domestic politics?
I would say so. He's desperate to change the conversation. Obviously, if you follow the news, there is just one bad day after another going between the Mueller investigation, between the issue in New York where they're going after his personal attorney, the private lawsuits today. The Democrats have formally sued him, the Russians, saying, and Twitter, saying that, not Twitter, Facebook, saying that they believe that there was collusion that affected the outcome of the rest. So obviously he would love to shift the focus there. I think that was things, everybody was surprised he took the meeting. But now the question is, what is meant by denuclearization? And I think the thing that will emerge is that the U.S. timetable is something you get rid of in the next 6 months to a year. And I think South Korea, based on a mistrust, perhaps, of the U.S., based on the experience with Iran, Iraq, Libya, etc., will probably say, no, we will become denuclearized after everything, our economy is set, and we are well on the road to being a power. Now, the question for China is, this is very, very difficult, because you don't want nations thinking that you gain economic ability by simply developing nuclear weapons and then sitting down with powers and insisting that they help you or else.
Ambassador Suga, do you think the United States is getting more realistic since the mere suspension of intercontinental ballistic missiles would be a big relief for politicians, Republicans and Democrats across the aisle at this moment? It would be a luxury. I wonder if this is the correct word. It would be a luxury to have a complete, irreversible denuclearization for the DPRK, because this regime has to be protected with the nuclear deterrence. What do you think of this assumption that the United States is getting realistic?
Well, this Korean Peninsula issue has been a decade-old quandary It's very difficult. I mean, there are all these big powers behind it. There are all these South and the North of Korea. They are deeply involved in it. And also this is an emotionally charged issue. For the United States, as Tong has said, that President Trump has domestic concerns. As for international relations, how to deal with this denuclearization issue, that's something which is also very high on the American policymakers. For China, of course, China wants to see a denuclearized Korean Peninsula. We want the eventual peace and stability. We want also see a peaceful peaceful solution of this. And in fact, that China has made an announcement towards this, saying that China welcomes this progress. Although this, the end is still, we need some time to reach the final end.
Exactly.
But this is conducive, at least for the relaxation of tension. It suits the interests of the people here and also the interests even of the region and of the world as well.
Few would be sure about whether this is the end game of denuclearization. But do you view the dramatic development as an apparent sign of the maximum pressure imposed by the United States, such as military drills, fan the fury, that kind of a bellicose rhetoric from the White House?
I think the maximum pressure campaign did play some role. Of course, if there were no such unprecedented economic and military pressure, North Korea would love to continue with a few more ICBM tests, simply to further improve the reliability of the entire system. There are some remaining technologies, such as the reentry vehicle, that has not been fully demonstrated by North Korea. But with those unprecedented pressure, North Korea decided to be satisfied with the existing technology it had obtained by the end of 2017. That's sufficient to some extent for the North Koreans, because they do not really need to have a 100% reliable system to constitute a credible deterrent. Even if the system has a low reliability, the United States would have to assume it might work if really used. So I think North Korea basically already got what it needed, and therefore decided to move into the next stage, which is to deal with economic consequences and try to establish a normal relationship with the rest of the international community on the basis of keeping its existing nuclear capabilities.
Let me go back to Joseph. Hello, Mr. Kim, Joe. I would prefer to call you Joe. By the end of the day, I'm afraid the issue would be security assurance. Now, everybody here is talking about the prospects of having the peace agreement to be signed between the two Koreas as the first step in the correct direction of generating something like a security guarantee. Because without the security guarantee, you wouldn't have the remote luxury of having a complete denuclearization process. So what do you think of this prospect of a peace agreement to formally put an end to the war that is in theory still going on between the two Koreas, with the DMZ being the hallmark?
Well, I think there's been a lot of debate on this, as well as some optimism here, especially in South Korea, where we know that South Korea and the DPRK are still technically at war, given that it is an armistice agreement that's currently making it so that tensions haven't escalated to further physical conflict. But as the gentlemen in the studio have said, we know that right now, in terms of what the DPRK wants, we don't know exactly what denuclearization is, what the definition is, and what concessions or what they'll want in return. And these are very difficult things to not know before signing a peace treaty, because essentially if you don't have that conflict within place and you do sign a formal agreement, then that technically could mean that U.S. troops here in South Korea could withdraw out of the region, and it also could mean that the security of South Korea could also be jeopardized. So I think there is a lot of concern also on the part of the United States as well as South Korea that they don't just hurry on to a peace treaty, but also fully understand what the definition that the DPRK is essentially saying when they say they're going to denuclearize. If, like what they said in their announcement today, where they have completed it, so that if they are attacked or if they are provoked, that they could restart it once again and rebuild their nuclear weapons. That would be a problem because that actually wouldn't fit the definition that South Korea and the United States are currently looking for.
Joe, perhaps this question will be asked for everyone here, the three guest speakers as well as Joe. What do you think of the pecking order of having Mr. Kim Jong Un coming to China hat in hand in the first place, and then that will be followed by a summit meeting in Pompeos around the 38th parallel between President Moon Jae-in and Mr. Kim. And last but not the least, of course, is the long-awaited summit between President Trump and Kim Jong Un. What do you think of the pecking order? Any message that could be delivered through this pecking order?
I think there's definitely a strategic method in which the DPRK chose in terms of how and who they're going to meet first and who they're going to contact. If we do remember in the beginning of the year when the olive branch by the DPRK was given, they said that they would participate in the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. That essentially paved the road in order for inter-Korean relations to improve and for tensions to also be lowered and for dialogue to actually start. But in terms of his first visit, he went to visit his closest ally in China, and making sure that his international debut going outside of the DPRK, that the first place he visited was China. And that essentially shows various things. It shows that the DPRK does still have an ally in China, as they reaffirmed that they are still good partners, and that both those leaders said those words exactly. And so after that, when they do meet with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, now they also aren't just isolated in a community by themselves, but they're also having different partnerships that are ongoing with them. That's also why we saw them visiting various different countries such as Sweden and Finland, and really starting their diplomatic engines in terms of trying to get more people to understand their positions. And after, they used South Korea, meeting with South Korea, as a vehicle in order to talk with the United States, because at the end of the day, the DPRK has clearly stated throughout history that it is not South Korea that they want to have communication with, but it's rather with the United States to make sure that hostile policies by the United States stops against the DPRK.
And how do you respond to the interpretations of Joe in terms of the pecking order?
Well, I think it's a little bit soft. I think you have to realize that the DPRK is a rogue nation, as defined by the United Nations. It's under sanctions. It has broken all of the nuclear accords doing this. So what we're dealing with here is a country that's coming. Everybody is anxious to avoid the kind of death that would occur if there was, in fact, an armed response by the U.S. or by South Korea or by Japan. It doesn't matter who. 1/4 of South Korea's population would be under direct threat, not through nuclear bombs, but through conventional weapons that could just rain terror and death upon them. So everyone's anxious to do this. But the way that the DPRK has gone about this is not the way that you want other countries doing it. Do you want to see other countries throughout Asia, Europe, Africa, South America doing the same thing, using the nuclear weapon as a leveraging tool to increase their economics? I don't think so. So in terms of the U.S., I think he's done a masterful job, because what you have now is that they have been seen to be offering something up front. So if Donald Trump walks away from this, as he says, or says, I don't want to do this, it'll look like the U.S. is the one who's turning their back, the one who's being unreasonable. So from being a rogue nation under the UN situation, they have now turned the tables and said, look, we're compromising a little bit, we want you to do the same. As I said, what this is going to come down to, very simply, is about time. The U.S. is going to say we want an immediate denuclearization, and North Korea is going to say we want a verifiable one, which means over many, many years.
What do you think of the results from the trip, the secret one, by CIA Director Pompeo to the DPRK?
Well, after Pompeo went to Pyongyang, he went to the Congress to conduct this hearing of his confirmation as nominee of the Secretary of State. And he actually said one thing that I think is very illustrative of the results of his meeting with Kim Jong Un, which was, he said, it's not possible for us to have a comprehensive deal to denuclearize North Korea. I'm paraphrasing here. But we want to kickstart a process that at the end of the day might lead to that goal. So I think that's just several days after his meeting with Kim Jong Un. I think that says clearly that the U.S. actually could be flexible about the results of the US-North Korea summit. They could accept something short of an immediate North Korean denuclearization. They could actually accept some near-term measures by North Korea, such as suspending their program, dismantling the nuclear test site, even joining CGTN conference.
I'm going to disagree with you completely. It's the reasonable thing to do, but this is not the way that Donald Trump does it. He's a strong man. He's already, after that, what did he say? They don't give me what I want, I'm going to get up and walk out of the room. I mean, politically, he set the stage for his grassroots, who he plays to daily, to say that I'm going to be a tough guy, and these guys either going to knuckle under or else. And we know what the or else is. So politically, yes. From a State Department point of view, absolutely reasonable. From Donald Trump's politics, no.
What do you think of the bargaining chips that Mr. Kim Jong Un has in his hand after meeting with President Xi Jinping, who gave him a very warm, high-profile reception, as if the troubled relationship between Pyongyang and Beijing had been normalized overnight?
Yeah. As you have just alluded, that there have been some ups and downs in the bilateral relations between China and DPRK. But most recently, the visit by Kim at the invitation of President Xi Jinping, that has been a historic one. It has turned the relationship into the correct direction, and I think that the most important reason is that China has been a responsible member in the international community, who has always been for peace and for stability, for dialogue in the region, because China has proposed for the dual suspension and dual making efforts so that there will be eventually a peace talk instead of this armistice. And I think that what is expected by researchers is that I think as for the what's to come, what hurdles are lying ahead, I think that denuclearization would be the most tough issue, because the West, like the United States, has always been saying that they need the CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible, and destruction of the nuclear weapons, but it's from the apparently from the existing statements, you cannot just come to that kind of conclusion. But anyway, as I said earlier, this is a good beginning that should be welcomed.
That's why perhaps I asked a question as to whether the United States is getting realistic by talking smart on a process to kickstart a very difficult process of denuclearization. You need to make some concessions in the first place. The last question is about, many people discuss the possibility of whether DPRK would be opened up to follow the Chinese mode of development. You open up, you have Richard Nixon to engage China, and then normalization during the Carter administration, and then the dynamics of Chinese economic reform. So how likely would that happen in the DPRK, Tony and Anna?
You go first.
Well, I think that's very likely, to be honest.
He gave us a very optimistic picture.
Well, I think Kim Jong Un has an ambition to become the Deng Xiaoping of North Korea. And if we talk
or perhaps Chiang Ching-kuo in Taiwan.
Yes, yes. And in the Chinese case, the reason why China was able to open up and reform under Deng Xiaoping was because after Deng Xiaoping took power, our threat perception changed. We no longer believe a third world war was imminent, and we thought our security environment was okay. And that's why Deng Xiaoping was able to reform and open up. And now for Kim Jong Un, he has nuclear weapons, he has nuclear deterrent capability, he gets a basic sense of security. So after resolving the security problem, now he has much bigger capability to pivot to economic development. Actually, after he took into power, he was the first North Korean leader to openly say that economic development was equally as important as military development. And after achieving nuclear deterrent, he just announced at this plenum meeting that we are going to focus on economic development. I think he has that ambition. And I also talked recently with a former senior North Korean official. He also said he believed after Kim Jong Un obtained the nuclear deterrent, he is going to shift all the resources even he's going to even reduce the number of conventional troops and to shift all these resources and personnel to the economic sector. So I think that is happening right now, and a very powerful message. I can imagine Kim Jong Un telling President Trump in person is that he's going to say that, look, President Trump, now I feel safe. I'm going to transform North Korea into a normal, a rich, a prosperous country in the future. I want North Korea to be a respected member of the international community. So join me in creating a new chapter in North Korea, in helping me transforming North Korea to achieve that goal. That's
whatever similarities between our paramount leader Deng Xiaoping and Kim Jong Un, who's much, much younger, I wonder if Mr. Kim would love to go ahead with a massive disarmament of up to 1 million military personnel. That's what Deng Xiaoping did in the aftermath of the Cultural Revolution. I mean, do you think the military first principle is likely to be changed?
Well, he can, but it's been a long-standing structure of the economy. And right now, you have to remember, when you look at the satellite image of North Korea, you see lights on in China, all over China. You see lights in South Korea. You see nothing in North Korea except Pyongyang and the other city. So he's really starting very, very low on the totem pole. You can say, oh, China did the same thing another time. But, you know, time has marched on. There's a tremendous amount of money that's needed. And I think China's pulling back 1/3 of their total income by canceling these coal and iron ore shipments, devastated their economy, because this is very hard to make up, this amount of money. So they're going to need a tremendous aid package in order to just start the process. Then the question comes, do they have, you know, the technicians, the people who can actually run an economy? I mean, when you talk to people who've been outside Pyongyang, they talk about roads with no cars, a few trucks, and mostly carts pulled by oxen, people living basically in a rural, you know, poverty. So, you know, changing that is not going to be easy.
Well, it doesn't come as a surprise, Joe. It doesn't come as a surprise that Mr. Kim Jong Un really wants to have a lift of the economic sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council. But what would be the preconditions for lifting such sanctions? Because China would, of course, reach out very quickly to the DPRK and provide investment and normalize the trade. But what would be the preconditions from your perspective?
Well, I think for the United States and South Korea, it has to be denuclearization on the table, and that's their definition of denuclearization. In terms of what sanction has done and how it might have contributed to the DPRK really coming to the dialogue table and perhaps offering up to give up its nuclear weapons, we have seen since last year that there's been a great shift. According to some estimates, it's even predicted that exports out of North Korea have fallen as much as 30%, and we know that trade between South Korea and the DPRK fell over 90% after the Kaesong industrial complex fell. Now, some networks that I have and some sources that I have been telling me as well that some of the exports that they've experienced and have become used to here in South Korea from the DPRK no longer comes, and we do know that the reinforcement of sanctions has really become tightened. So this, if Kim Jong Un really does want to develop his economy and really try to open up the market in different ways, especially as we've seen the private market in the DPRK really flourish, and some estimates say even make up half of the country's GDP. We know that Kim Jong Un will really have to do something now in terms of trying to get the U.S. as well as South Korea to try to restart the trade that he has.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Yes, we're going to see what will happen between Mr. Kim Jong Un and his South Korean counterpart in the upcoming summit in Pompeos. But thank you, everybody, for participation in this dialogue on the latest development in the Korean Peninsula. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.